Hello, and welcome to a new episode of F.NSPE's Committee Corner. I'm your host, Margaret Edwards, and this week we're here to talk about Engineers Week and Diversity in STEM. And for this conversation and episode today, we're joined by Leanne Panduren, PE Fellow NSPE, who currently serves as the chair of F.NSPE's Committee on Policy and Advocacy, or COPA. She is also the CEO and president at Rowe Professional Services Company in Michigan. Leanne, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So let's just dive right in. So to start off, Engineers Week is coming up. This year, it is taking place from February 20th through 26th of 2022. Engineers Week was founded by F.NSPE in 1951, and it is dedicated to ensuring a diverse and well-educated future engineering workforce by increasing understanding of and interest in engineering and technology careers. Something that we do, since we're here in the Committee Corner, something that we do on the government relations and advocacy side of things each year is work with a member of Congress to introduce a resolution recognizing Engineers Week and the contributions that engineers regularly make to society. This year, we're working again with Congressman Jerry McNerney from California, who is an engineer himself, not a PE, but an engineer. And he was also last year's sponsor on a resolution. And also just kind of putting it out there, once that gets introduced, we'll be looking for you, our NSPE members, to participate and ask your member of Congress to support this resolution and gather co-sponsors and build support for it as it moves through the legislative process. So Leanne, we have you here. You're a PE. I'm not. I'm just a staff member here at NSPE. And for me, as someone who has only participated in Engineers Week as a staff member, how do you celebrate Engineers Week as a professional engineer?
Well, I've been really lucky. My children are in 10th and 7th grade now, but since they started, I think the first time I went in was kindergarten. I have tried to schedule and go into their classrooms every year. I used to schedule it during Engineers Week, but about 5 years ago, our school changed their calendar and our kids get Engineers Week off every year. So now I celebrate it usually on a vacation, but that just means that I go into their classrooms usually in March or April. And I utilize, if you have not been on the EWeek website, everybody listening out there, they have some really cool all put together kits, walk you right through what to do in classrooms, and it's set up by age, type of engineering. So I've utilized those resources from EWeek for 12 years now to pull that information in and present different things in the classroom. So that's something I do personally. As a company, we usually celebrate it. We usually put some stuff on our socials. We'll have cupcakes for everybody or some fun things like that during Engineers Week. But we have surveyors, so we have to do it for Surveyors Week and some other weeks too, but we don't let the engineers slide. We do some celebrating.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so kind of my, next question, and you touched how you do it kind of in your, year to year, Engineers Week to Engineers Week. But what are some easy ways for, NSPE members, the larger engineering community to participate in EWeek and celebrate it themselves?
Yeah, there's a ton of resources. Discovery is great if it's something you feel like you want to go out and maybe it's not presented at school. Maybe it's look at a youth group in the area. I know our chapter here in Michigan and several of our chapters put on different type of programs during those weeks. So maybe if it's something you want to do at the chapter or even the state level to get it organized. And again, the key there is just getting out and talking about engineering and what it means to everybody, that it's not, a very narrow profession. It's a very wide and broad profession, and just introducing that to the next generation is really what I see as the purpose of Engineers Week. It's celebrating us that are already engineers, but its real purpose is getting someone that may not even understand that engineering is what they want to do because they don't really know what we do to know more about their career paths.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then kind of one final question here for this part of today's episode and conversation. It's, because this year, Engineers Week theme is reimagining the possible. What should we take away from this year's theme, and kind of, whether it's, informing how we, kind of approach the work that engineers do, or, kind of taking the spirit of EWeek into the rest of 2022?
I think it's very broad. You can interpret it a ton of ways. Because we're also talking about diversity, I sort of looked at it through that lens of, realistically, one of the first things I do anytime I go in a classroom is I walk somebody through their entire day. Like, what's the first thing that you do? Maybe it's hit your alarm clock, or, it's turn on the light, brush your teeth, get food out of the refrigerator, drive to school. Every single facet of your life is touched by engineering in some way. Mm-hmm. And just putting that out there, and that engineers are problem solvers. So that whole reimagining the possible is, there is a spot for anybody that has a passion to make a change and make things better in engineering, whether it's a civil engineer like me, or a chemical engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, software engineer. There is a spot for you to make things better and make things that seem impossible today possible, right? When I was, a child growing up, these were, nothing. There were no, you can't see it in the screen, but my cell phone, right? Just think of the things that we can do and just held in our hand that 30 years ago, people didn't know about, right? So again, it's our job is to sort of reimagine what's possible, take that impossible, make it possible. And I think that's where you can really make a connection when we talk about pipeline and diversity. Somebody that maybe really cares about, biology and making maybe prosthetic limbs or something like that. A school might have tried to drive them into more of a medical field, but maybe that's not really where their passion is, but they can still help people and have that biomechanical degree. So again, I think it's really getting that information out there that our purpose is to take things that seem impossible and make them possible. And then that really pulls in a broader range of individuals, which is what we need to have a more diverse workforce. We need to find spots where everybody can plug in.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm so happy you kind of weaved diversity into that answer there. And I think, really, we're here in, NSPE's Community Corner. Somebody might be asking, like, what the heck are they, talking about, Engineers Week and Diversity for, and they're supposed to be telling me about Congress. And so I think that begs the question of, how does Congress fit into this conversation that, Leanne and I are having around STEM, around diversity in STEM? And they fit into it. They have a voice to add, and, they really have done this through, offering legislative solutions, to either kind of diversify that STEM pipeline, or diversify, STEM fields in general. Here we only have a small list of the many ways that they try to legislatively, attack or, tackle the big question of, increasing diversity in STEM fields. And so there's a few on here, that I would like to highlight. And I think, the first one on the list. It's the Supporting STEM Learning Opportunities Act. And the point of this bill is to establish a grant program to promote hands-on learning opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and math education for pre-K, elementary, and secondary school students. So kind of looking at that whole, elementary through, secondary, middle school, high school journey that that kids go on, and kind of bringing that into the classroom a little bit more. And that's done through, the National Science Foundation and through that path and that they do. Also on here is the Inspires Act. If anybody around here, anybody listening was, around for our fireside chat series that we did in August and September of 2020, we highlighted the Inspires Act, worked with the folks over at Discover E, who, we work with on Engineers Week and various, efforts related to engineering education, and brought on a staffer for Senator Schatz from Hawaii, who's one of the main sponsors of the Inspires Act in the Senate. There's also the Supporting Minority STEM Student to Career Act. That bill authorizes minority institutions to use minority science and engineering improvement program funds to, one, provide direct financial assistance to students who are underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and math, and two, to improve institutional capacity to provide students with certain services once they, are at whichever academic, institution for pursuing those studies. All the ones on here, and there's certainly more. NSPE, at least from, we follow this legislation, we, engage our members, particularly for like the Inspires Act, we had an advocacy campaign for that. So there's ways for you to be involved. And if this issue is something that is really near and dear to your heart, and you have any, desire to just follow congressional committees, there's a few key committees that you should kind of take a look at. And on the House side, it's the Education and Labor Committee, and then also the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. And then on the Senate side, we have the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and then the Senate Health Committee, which is the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. So kind of, on both sides of, Capitol Hill, doing, similar work with similar jurisdictions. And, Leanne, we have her on, joining us today, and her member of Congress, Representative Dan Kildee, sits on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. So that's a great way, if Leanne has an existing relationship with him, to have this conversation and to find those ways to bring the engineering voice, the PE voice, to the table. So that's kind of, how Congress is looking at and tackling the question. Leanne, I saw you unmuted. I don't know if you have anything.
Well, no, I was just going to add to that I think, sometimes you get pushback on these, that people think they're sort of fluff legislation, and is there really a purpose? And realistically, I'm assuming most of our listeners work in the industry. We all understand there's a huge workforce cliff coming up, that we have a lot of engineers who are retiring. And we need to bring in that next generation of engineers. And if it takes something like this, that they can get scholarships, or this at least puts STEM even more in the forefront. I mean, again, 10 years ago, we were all pushing STEM, and we knew what the word was, but now I think across the country, a lot of schools are putting STEM programs in place. So I think just keeping talking about these things helps promote that, again, at all levels. And, the whole diversity thing, I've been asked that question before, because a lot of these programs are trying to increase diversity of, you should just let it happen organically. If they want to go into engineering, people will go into engineering. Well, the reality is you have a certain pool of candidates. And if you don't try to branch out from that, there is no way we are going to have enough engineers to fill the need. And sometimes it's really hard for somebody that can't see themselves in that group to go into that career path. So we need to do everything we can to at least get a chance to get them into the program, and hopefully get them through it and succeed, because we're all better with a more diverse workforce.
Yeah. Thanks so much for adding that, Leanne. I think that pivots us, kind of nicely into this last few questions that I have for you. And, the first is, I think you kind of touched on it in kind of what you just said now, but how can engineers work on developing a diversity pipeline? Yes. Anyways.
I was just going to say, I think we don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. We have to work on pipeline development, and we are shooting ourselves in the foot if we focus on half of the population and 30% of that population that actually wants to go into engineering, if that, right? So, there's diversity in a lot of different ways, but I think we really have to understand that, one, we have to do it just from a sheer number standpoint, but two, we're better engineers if we're challenged and collaborating, and you do better in those situations, even though you might not like it, if everybody in the room doesn't think exactly the same way or have the same life experiences, right? Sometimes we get anxious if somebody pushes back on an idea or questions us, but I think most of us would say when we come out on the other side, we have a better solution. So there's the idea of the quality of our engineering that I think does better with the diverse workforce. And then there's just the sheer numbers of, if we don't tap into everybody out there, we're never going to have enough people coming into our industry in the engineering field to fill the need. So there's the two different pieces of why it's so important, and who's going to do it if not us, right? I don't see a doctor pushing someone to go into engineering unless they have a background in that. I can give an example. I spoke at my daughter's class, it was pre-COVID, so a few years ago, and I happened to run into one of the students in her class and her mom at a store that evening. And she introduced me to her mom and said, oh, she was in talking about engineering. And the mom is a highly educated professional, an attorney. And she looked at her daughter and said, well, engineering, why would you want to go into that? You hate math. And I was so proud of the daughter, because that's one of the things I talk about. She said, well, Mrs. Panduren told us you don't have to love math. You know, there's different types of engineering and all this other stuff. And she sort of stood up for engineering. But in my mind, you know, I don't know, those stereotypes and all of that are out there. So who's going to fight for us if not us? So we're the ones that have to go tell our story, talk about engineering to get that next generation interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that you and I kind of talked about before, starting recording was, really introducing the concept of engineering to like younger kids, not just like high school. So can you kind of speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's so important. There's a lot of things that get thrown at kids in high school, right? And a lot of schools, don't get me wrong, are getting much better about talking about career development and what do you want to be, and having programs set up even when they're in junior high. But again, they get a list that tells them, okay, you typed in all this information and you can be one of these 8 things. And maybe engineer is one of them, but they may not know what that is. So again, I think it's really important, like I did, starting in elementary, but at a minimum, we need to be in the middle school grades, talking to students about these programs. We can't wait till they've self-selected into a project lead the way when they're sophomores or juniors. We need to be in the 7th grade science class or the 7th grade math class talking about these programs, or 7th grade technology classes about different career paths and what they can do. And the other part of that I think is so important is, while we're not diverse in engineering right now, we really have to push having our diverse members be the ones that go out and talk. Because I can tell you, as a woman going in and talking to some of those classes, I think I've probably created opportunities, or at least some of the girls in the room see someone that looks like them and can picture themselves having that career that may not be as possible if it was a male up there, for instance. And I think you see the same thing when you look from a racial diversity as well as gender, that I think that's so important that we have to give back in that manner. And that as those of us in engineering that are in diverse populations, there's a little bit more burden on our shoulder to make sure we're going out and having those conversations.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think it kind of leads into me asking you this final question that I have, is, how do you in your day-to-day and, your current work and practice as an engineer, overcome challenges or work through, maybe a lack of diversity in engineering, and is this something that has, changed, throughout your career, kind of moving through, various levels at your organization, or, kind of, yes.
Yeah, I think definitely, I've been in the workforce for 28 years. So it's definitely changed in 28 years. I went to a to Michigan Tech University, so highly technical college. When I started up there, I think it was less than 20% women. And now it's, depending on the program you're in, the environmental engineering actually has more women than men. Civil is still pretty low, but, definitely the population up there is getting more diverse. So I think that just that number has changed. But I also think the acceptance of, that diversity isn't going away. Every year it gets a little bit better in the workforce. And as businesses and as practicing engineers, I think one thing that we can all do is make sure we talk a lot about diversity, but we also have to talk about inclusion to go along with that, because just getting people to select into engineering, maybe get their degree, but then they get out in the workforce, and if what they find is, that's great, you're here, but it's not an inclusive environment, you're not thriving. A lot of people can self-select out of engineering. Let's be real. It's a really good program and degree to go off and do other things. And it's a great base. So we have to make sure that as business owners and as professionals, just peer professionals, we're thinking about that, like being inclusive. And I think sometimes you get stuck in the, well, I had to suffer through it, so they're going to need to suffer through it mentality. And it's really, you have to change that mindset that, you know, you need to be a helper and make it better for them. You know, think about what you struggled through. That doesn't mean it's a rite of passage. You should say, I don't want anybody else to have to struggle through that, and do those things, whether it's in mentoring or peer relationships. If you have risen to a management level in your company and you can affect change that way, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can plug in and help that. And just by doing that, you're helping pipeline development. Because if you get people to come into it, love it, then they're going to spread that out to other people. So again, I think there's a lot of different ways, and every individual is going to plug in a little bit differently. But I think that's what we have to think about. It's not getting people to go into engineering and get their degree and go into the workforce is only step one. Then we have to create a welcoming, inclusive environment that supports everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that answer offers a lot of insight, and I think ways that individuals can, you know, take and reflect, and I think about, okay, what can I do in my day to day? Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So kind of, you know, before we kind of close out today, do you have any final thoughts that maybe you thought of for an earlier question that came to mind, and here's your chance.
Well, it's maybe not an earlier question, but I'm going to take a couple minutes, since I am the chair of our COPA committee, to just plug getting involved in public policy, whether it's at the national level, which, you know, Margaret's going to share some website information, whether it's at your state level, whether it's just going to city council meetings or, you know, township board meetings. Those are our designations here in Michigan, to get involved, because so many decisions are made that affect our careers and affect everything that goes on, where we have unique knowledge to help. Not many engineers go into the legislature at any level, but they are the ones making decisions on policy that affects us, whether it's funding, just our careers, our licensing laws, everything. So I encourage all of our members and any non-members that are watching that are of interest to get involved at whatever level makes sense for you, because I think that is so important. And if we're going to tie it back to diversity, I think it's really important to have a diverse group get involved, because again, if you're talking to legislators and they hear from a diverse group, they're more likely to say that this has a pretty broad support than if they hear from 4 or 5 people that look the same, talk the same, have the same background. So again, I think that diversity sort of plays into every level of what we do here.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I don't think I could have said that better myself, Leanne, about the need to have that seat at the table and to really contribute that, you know, engineer's voice or PE voice to the public policy conversation. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today, Leanne. I thought this was great.
A pleasure.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you. So please, you know, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tune into our next episode, or even take a look at past episodes of NSPE's Committee Corner. You can find us on the NSPE Advocacy Center or on the NSPE YouTube page. Thank you.